Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for August edition of the 2017 Educational Webinar Series. My name is Lori and I will be your moderator. Today's meeting is all about food labeling claims and how to avoid potential legal action and consumer confusion when it comes to promoting your products. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and take you through a couple of housekeeping items. We will be muting you during today's webinar, so you won't have to worry about the background noise from wherever you're tuning in. On your screen, you'll also see a small chat box. Please use the chat box to type in any questions you have as we go through the slides today, and at the end of the call, we will be able to get those questions answered. We should have plenty of time for questions, so please don't be shy. If for any reason the audio goes out during today's webinar, just stay on the line and you will be placed into a lobby and be reconnected once we get the audio back up. If you happen to lose the connection on your end, just dial back in and you'll be placed right back into the call. And finally, we will be recording the webinar today, but won't be making the slides available as a PDF. The recording will be posted on the MenuTrinfo YouTube channel, so you can rewatch it. But please take notes and ask questions to make sure you can take back all of this information to your brand. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and read our disclaimer in its entirety. The content shown here is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. We are not lawyers and do not claim to be. You are encouraged to verify any and all parts of this presentation with your own brand's legal counsel. MenuTrinfo will not be held responsible for fines or other penalties that arise from recommendations that were made following our best understanding of all published laws and supplemental guidance documents. This webinar contains material protected under international and federal copyright laws and treaties. Any unauthorized reprint or use of any kind of this material is prohibited. No part of this webinar may be reproduced or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic or mechanical, including photocopying, recording, or by any information storage and retrieval system without expressed written permission from MenuTrinfo, the author and publisher. Before we dive into the content of today's webinar, we'd like to give you a little bit of background on our company, MenuTrinfo. MenuTrinfo is a mashup of the words menu, nutrition, information, which describes what we do. We are a full-service nutrition consultant to the industry. We provide nutrition information through our proprietary software and database, as well as allergen identification, gluten-free menu reviews, specialty menu development, and menu labeling consulting. We also have the only ANSI-accredited food allergy training program in the nation through AllerTrain, with 10 courses available that teach food service professionals about food allergies, intolerances, and celiac disease. The AllerTrain suite of courses caters to various food service professionals and settings, including restaurant managers, hourly employees, chefs, university dining halls, university resident advisors, and primary and secondary school staff. Various course delivery options are available, including e-learning, classes taught by our certified master trainers, and also via live webinar. Whatever your training needs and preferences are, we are sure that we can meet them. Please reach out to us if you are interested in setting up any food allergy training. And finally, a newer branch for us encompasses our gluten-free and food allergy kitchen audits through Kitchens with Confidence. For more information about audits, you can go to kitchenswithconfidence.com or send us an email. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without our incredible clients, and we do have a handful of them on the call today, so thank you all for joining us. This slide shows you just a few of the incredible brands we have the honor of working with. We want to keep the sales talk here to a minimum, but if after this webinar you're interested in learning more about our services or what our nutrition partnership looks like, please feel free to give us a call. We'll be sending out an email to all participants today with our contact information, and we would love to hear from you. With all the housekeeping tasks behind us, let's go ahead and dive into the webinar. Our speaker today is Claire Willis, who is the Director of Nutrition here at MenuTrinfo. She has been working with the company for over 5 years and has seen the full growth and evolution of menu labeling and other food-related legislation during that time. She has led dozens of menu labeling webinars as well as privately hosted menu labeling workshops by brands across the country. Claire has worked with hundreds of different food service establishments around the country and has worked with them to ensure that their foods are being labeled properly. She is able to offer a unique insight into this area of food labeling and its importance in relaying important nutrition and allergen information to diners. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Claire.
Great. Thank you, Lori, for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us here today for our webinar. And what's quickly becoming tradition in these webinars, I'd like to kick things off with a poll question. So if you wouldn't mind just typing your answer into that chat box on your screen, that would be great. So I'm curious, how many of you offer packaged foods that require a full nutrition facts panel? So maybe you have a private line of some of your recipes. Maybe you sell packaged goods yourself. Maybe you have packaged desserts or sides in your establishments. Yes, yes, yes. On-the-go products, yes, we do. Do grab-and-go products count? That's a question. And that depends on your local food code and how the product is being displayed to the guest. But that could certainly require a full nutrition label. Yes, yes. Okay, great. So quite a few of you. Okay, and the second poll question, do any of you make any nutrition, health, or ingredient claims on your food? So good source of calcium, heart healthy, gluten-free, that type of thing? Yes, yes. We have a no. Yes, yes, no. Not currently. Yes. Okay, so that's a little bit more mixed. Wonderful. So food labeling, as I'm sure all of you that have products that require labeling know, can be pretty tricky, especially when it comes to claims that you can and can't make on your products. So with that being said, it's not surprising that things can go wrong. So I thought that we'd kick things off with some headlines that were made by food companies that didn't get their labeling quite right. And we'll start with Naked Juice, which is owned by Pepsi. Back in 2016, they were sued by a public health organization called Centers for Science in the Public Interest, or CSPI. They're a heavy-hitting nutrition watchdog group in the industry. But they had a couple different complaints with Naked Juice. Number one, they thought that the names and pictures on the label were misleading. A good example of this is their Kale Blazer juice, which had a bunch of pictures of kale, dark leafy greens, but in reality, most of that product was apple and orange juice. CSPI also had an issue with Naked Juice being portrayed as this healthy product, but it was so high in sugar. One of their products, the pomegranate blueberry juice, it was advertised as no sugar added, but it still had over 60 grams of sugar, which is actually more than a can of Pepsi. So Naked Juice took this to heart. They did make some changes to their label. They're using more accurate imagery, so on that Kale Blazer, incorporating all of the different fruits and vegetables that are in that juice. They're also being more careful in identifying if something is a fruit juice, a fruit and veggie juice combination, or a smoothie, so they don't strain out the pulp in that one. And then they also included a statement, this is not a low-calorie food, since I think there was some confusion there with consumers. Okay, and next up is Kind Bars, and this wasn't a lawsuit that landed them in the news. It was a warning letter that they received from the FDA. So Kind Bars, if you're familiar with them, they are handled as a healthy product. They're promoted as a healthy product. They use some different imagery and verbiage on their labels that would make you think that they're good for you. I'm not saying that they aren't. But the FDA had an issue because the FDA has a definition for healthy, which includes limits to total fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, and sodium. It also requires at least 10% of your daily value of a certain beneficial nutrient like vitamins and minerals or fiber. And this was a definition that was put into place in 1993. So that was 24 years ago, and since then there has been quite a change in our understanding of nutrition and understanding that not so much the total fat, but really the source of the fat is what matters. So Kind Bars are primarily composed of nuts, which is a lot of unsaturated fat. So some of their bars had nearly 3 times the amount of total fat, but it was mainly coming from mono and polyunsaturated sources. So Kind went ahead and agreed with the FDA that they didn't fulfill the requirement for the healthy definition. But then back in 2016, the FDA backtracked a little bit and said that Kind was using healthy more as explaining what their brand is and what their mission is, not so much making a health claim on the food. So Kind is allowed to use healthy on their packaging now, and it also made the FDA realize that, hey, this definition is a little bit outdated. We should probably make some changes. So they are looking to revamp their healthy definition, which is exciting. Okay, now touching on food service. Poor Chipotle seems to land in the news more than any other chain restaurant, and one of their biggest lawsuits happened back in 2015 after the brand announced that their product line was non-GMO. And this was initially met with a lot of consumer excitement, but then as people started to look into it a little bit deeper, it wasn't totally the case. They still served fountain drinks that contained high fructose corn syrup made from genetically modified corn. They also served dairy and meat and poultry that came from animals that were fed GMO feed. So there were a couple different consumers that felt they were being misled by Chipotle's claims. The first lawsuit came in 2015 from California. That one was dismissed by the judge. But then a little while later, there was a Florida lawsuit which is still ongoing. Originally, it was going to be dismissed as well, but the judge ruled that the lawsuit could move forward. And as far as we know, unless they've settled out of court and haven't made that public, we don't know where their lawsuit is at as far as who won, who lost. But certainly Chipotle felt some heat on that one. And not to pick on poor Chipotle, but they did make recent news with some menu labeling concerns recently. So an individual went to a Chipotle location and saw the sign that you see on the screen here where it says chorizo burrito, 300 calories. So this guy thought, oh my gosh, that's great, I'll get that. He ate the burrito, and according to the lawsuit, he just felt too full. So he didn't feel like that could be correct. And turns out, according to Chipotle's social media, that 300 calories is just for the chorizo. Once you account for the rest of the components of the burrito, it's about 3 times as many calories. So this is pretty new, what's going on with Chipotle. And as far as we know, again, unless they've handled this outside of court, we don't know what the settlement is. Okay, so now we're going to go over some of the fundamentals of food labeling, specifically with the nutrition facts panel. So when it comes to a nutrition label and having proper labels for your product, the information that's required can be split up into 2 different panels. So we have the principal display panel, which contains the statement of identity. So that's the name of the product in basic language. So you can have Oreo as the brand name, but then the statement of identity would be sandwich cream cookie or something like that, something that explains in plain language what the product is. And you'll also have your net weight of contents. So for the total package, what the ounce weight is and what the gram weight is, or for liquids, quarts, gallons, and then what the milliliters are. And the principal display panel is what the guest sees when they walk into a grocery store and they look at a product. So like for a box of cereal, it would be that big front panel. But for things like tubs of butter, where maybe based on how it's displayed in the grocery store, somebody might be looking straight at it on a shelf, or they might be looking down into a deli case, a refrigerated case. So in that situation, there might be 2 principal display panels that would have to have those 2 requirements. And then immediately to the right of the information panel, or if that's not cohesive with labeling, then the next panel over is what we call the information panel, and this is where all the good stuff lives. So this is the nutrition facts panel, the ingredient list, the allergen statement, and the name, place of manufacturer. And when you're looking at your principal display panel and your information panel, there are some pretty specific requirements for placement and font size and style. Those can all be found on the FDA website, but that's the breakdown of where the information is supposed to be located. Okay, so now let's jump into some different labeling claims that the FDA allows. There are two that have to do with nutrients. One is a nutrient content claim and one is a health claim, and we'll go through both of those. So nutrient content claims are probably the easiest ones. They're the most straightforward. Not to say that they can't get messed up, but they are the most difficult to mess up. The FDA has quite a few different terms that they allow to be used on products, and those are listed here. So excellent source, that means that there's more than 20% of your daily value. Good source means between 10 and 19%. You can say contains X grams per serving as long as it's straightforward, not misleading. So you might see that one with protein quite a bit. Free from, X free, so that means it contains less than 0 grams of a certain nutrient. Obviously those would be nutrients to restrict. I don't think you'd see anyone claiming fiber free on a product. Doesn't really boost sales. Low in, that means that it contains less than 5% of the daily value. Reduced, this is a comparison between an existing product, so contains 10% less sodium than our original formula, or contains 20% more calcium than our biggest competitor, that type of thing. And light also has a definition. And while we're talking about mainly retail food labeling, so packaged goods, if a food service operator makes a claim about any of their prepared foods, so all of our smoothies are fat-free, then the FDA would expect that that establishment would have full nutrition information to back that up. So just be careful if you are making any of these nutrient content claims, not only on your food packages, but also for your restaurant-type foods, that the FDA does have some expectations that you can back it up with full nutrition information. Okay, so going a little bit more in depth into the free and low claims. Again, these ones can only be used for nutrients to limit. There's really no point in calling out low levels of beneficial nutrients. I don't think I've ever seen that in a grocery store. I'm not sure why you would ever see that. The FDA has some synonyms that they treat all the same. So if you think that you can say no or without or 0 instead of free and low and maybe use different parameters, that's not the case. The FDA considers all of these to be the same, and they'll hold them to the same standards. Okay, so the FDA has nutrient content claims that compare the product to something else. Usually it's a food in that same food category, or a standard food. An example you might see is contains 10% more calcium than a glass of milk. So that's a standard food that most consumers are familiar with, and you're kind of using that as your standard when you're making the comparisons. Some other examples you might see, 20% less sugar than our regular soda, 10% more iron than our previous formulation. Just anything where you're comparing it. You don't want to compare it to something completely outrageous and unlike the food. The FDA would have an issue with that, but as long as you're within the same category or using those standard foods, that would be just fine. Okay, and the percent and amount claims, these are probably the easiest ones again. The FDA has defined terms, so the excellent, good, low, those all have certain parameters that they must meet. And you're also able to just flat out declare the amount of a certain nutrient in your food, or you can list the percent daily value of your food, anything that's not misleading to guests and is just a factual statement. The FDA doesn't have an issue with that. And where it starts to get a little bit trickier is when we jump into these health claims. There are 3 different categories based on the message that's trying to be brought across to consumers. We have unqualified, qualified, and then structure function claims. And we'll go ahead and go through each of these. So unqualified claims, they explain a relationship between a nutrient and a disease or other health-related condition. And these are claims that are highly supported by science. So there's not a lot of gray area. There aren't tons of ongoing tests. It's stuff where medical researchers, health professionals believe that the information is accurate. So the FDA does list these on their website. On Triscuits, this is one that they do approve. It doesn't need any kind of qualifying claim. And it states diets low in sodium may reduce the risk of high blood pressure, a disease associated with many factors. So you'll see this comes up quite a few times, but you can't make any sort of statement about preventing or curing disease, but you can make a statement about a certain food or a certain nutrient being related to reducing the risk factors associated with certain diseases. Okay, so qualified claims, they're similar to unqualified in that they show a relationship between food and health, but what's different about these ones is that the science hasn't been nailed down all the way. So it's not as strong as the unqualified claims, so there needs to be a statement added at the end just to let consumers know that this isn't steadfast, the science is still being understood. And that's that last sentence here where it says, the FDA evaluated the data and determined that although there is some scientific evidence supporting the claims, the evidence is not conclusive. And what's interesting with qualified claims is that food manufacturers can submit their request to the FDA for certain claims that they want to make that have to do with health and well-being. And the FDA has to look at every single one of those and come up with approved statements that the manufacturer can use. I was recently at an event where there was a representative from the FDA, and he showed us an example. I believe it was a green tea maker, and they wanted to make a qualified health statement, and it was like 2 paragraphs long. It was outrageous, and by the end of it, it basically said that there's no science to support the claim. So I don't think that that manufacturer ended up putting that on their package, but that's what the FDA has to go through and work with manufacturers to figure out verbiage that they can use on their packages and not get them in trouble. Okay, and last one in health claims, these are structure function claims. And these are similar to unqualified claims in that the science behind it is sound and no qualifying statement is necessary, but it's different because instead of referencing a disease or a health condition, it talks about the normal function of a certain body system. So here on our Wheat Thins Fiber Selects, we have a statement that says fiber maintains bowel regularity. So that's one where, the science is proven behind fiber and what it does for digestive health, but instead of making a claim about a certain disease like colon cancer, it's talking about a normal function of the body. And while we're talking about health claims, might as well talk about healthy, which we did chat about a little bit with the Kind Bar petition from the FDA. So healthy has a definition, but like we mentioned, it's 24 years old. So the FDA is going to reevaluate what their belief is and what they can consider healthy food. But in the meantime, if you're using healthy or health or healthful, any of those synonyms that imply the same thing, you might be treading into some murky water since the FDA hasn't released that new definition yet. So just be careful. Know that it is a defined term. And you'll want to stay consistent with that until the FDA comes up with something new. Okay, and now we're really getting into dangerous territory here with the natural claim. This is one that the FDA has not yet formally defined. They do state that they consider natural to mean nothing artificial has been added and nothing that you wouldn't expect to be in that food. A good example, excuse me, is coconut oil that has beta-carotene added to give it this orange hue. You wouldn't necessarily think about beta-carotene being present in your coconut oil. So even though coconut oil and beta-carotene, they both may be natural ingredients, in this particular instance, we advised against using a natural claim because there's an ingredient in there that you really wouldn't expect. So the current definition, it doesn't touch on production methods at all. So, are genetically engineered products okay? Products that are sprayed with pesticides okay? You start to get into some more gray area with pesticides because there are synthetic pesticides which are used on conventional agriculture, and then there's organic pesticides. So are organic pesticides okay, and are synthetic pesticides not okay? But then if you go that far, then you're just kind of repeating the organic definition. So that's certainly tricky and something that they're going to have to figure out. And the current definition also doesn't touch on processing methods. So you're taking something from its natural state and completing either some kind of chemical process to it, such as pasteurization, you're warming it up, then cooling it back down. That makes the product safer, but it's, I don't know if tainted is the right word, but it's no longer in its initial state. It's been altered by man. Irradiation is another good one. So food can be taken and blasted with radiation to kill the microbes that are on the surface of the food. So if you're taking it that far, again, the whole point is to improve food safety, but is that no longer natural? And then finally, health benefits. So natural is going to be viewed as a positive thing, a positive label on foods. So should these products that contain the natural claim, should they also have some sort of health criteria? At the LAX airport yesterday, I may or may not have had a bag of potato chips, and it said natural on it. So while, yes, it was just potatoes, oil, and salt, it was still fried potatoes. So the FDA will have to consider all of this when they come out with their formal definition. But just in the meantime, be super, super careful when it comes to natural claims. I think that's probably where the most confusion has come with consumers, and certainly they're becoming more and more vocal about expressing those concerns with naturally labeled products. If they don't agree with it, then chances are there will be some sort of legal action. Okay, so now that we've gone through all of the FDA-approved nutrient-related labels, I have some examples here, and again in that chat box, when I show each one, I'm curious if you think that it's an allowable label or it's one that this manufacturer probably got in trouble with. Okay, so we're starting off with some antioxidant mix, trail mix, and here on the front it says good source of antioxidant vitamin E. Do you think that this is an allowable claim or not an allowable claim? If you want to chat, or excuse me, type into the chat box. Can say it, can say it, can say it, not allowed. Can say it, not allowed. Can say it. Okay, so we're kind of getting some mixed results here. I'd say 50-50 between can say it and can't say it. Okay, and this one we believe is okay to say. So it's a relative nutrient content claim. So there is a direct or implied claim talking about the nutrient level of that food. So good source of is something that's defined by the FDA as containing 10 to 19% of a nutrient. So we would hope, I guess we don't have the full picture here, but we would hope that this product has between 10 and 19% of your daily value of vitamin E, which is why they're making that claim on the package. The text also isn't twice as big as the statement of identity. That's important. So as far as we know, this one's okay. These guys haven't gotten in trouble. Okay, how about this one? This is a loaf of bread, and it says super healthy bread on the front. Is that something that these guys can say? Yes, no, 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 no. Okay, lots of no's on this one. Awesome, and I would agree with you. So super healthy is not a defined claim by the FDA. Healthy has a definition, but there's nowhere that says what super healthy is. as a consumer, you might assume that that has a different connotation than healthy, that there might be a different set of criteria that this bread has to follow, which isn't the case. So again, healthy, that definition may be changing, but super healthy, as far as we know, isn't going to be introduced anytime soon. All right, and how about these Quaker oatmeal squares? It says 3 grams of soluble fiber from oatmeal daily in a diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol may reduce the risk of heart disease. This cereal has 2 grams per serving. We have a couple no's, yes, 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 lots of yeses. Awesome. Okay, so I agree with you guys that yes, you can say this. We have a health claim that's being made, so we're relating a diet that's high in fiber, low in saturated fat and cholesterol, with reducing the risk of heart disease. So this is an unqualified claim because the science is super sound here, so we don't have to have a statement about inconclusive evidence or anything. This one's pretty set. They aren't claiming to prevent or cure heart disease, which is really important. They're just saying that the risk of developing it might be reduced by eating a particular diet, and not just this food. So they do mention that they are getting the fiber from oats, but they aren't saying that eating Quaker oatmeal squares reduces your risk of heart disease. It's about the certain nutrients and not the particular food. And something that I left out here, but I just realized, is that they're also making a nutrient content claim. I'm going to go back to this previous slide. That last line, this cereal has 2 grams per serving. So they aren't saying good source of or excellent source or anything like that. They're just stating the amount that the product has. So that's allowable. It's not misleading. Okay. And this one, full disclosure, we made up because it's hard to find some less than ideal labels online because companies don't tend to have them out very long. They tend to get busted. So I think I gave away the answer on this one, but you guys already have it. No, 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 mostly no's. So we have some wild sockeye salmon, and on the package, again, we made this up. It says, eating fish 2 times per week prevents heart disease. Okay, so no, you cannot say this. You can't make any claims about preventing or curing diseases. You can only correlate a certain nutrient or a certain diet to reducing the risk of a certain disease. So these guys could have had a qualified health claim that they got approved by the FDA that talks about omega-3 content in heart disease, but again, chose not to do that. They just went straight to the chase and said that we will cure and prevent heart disease, which is a no-no. Okay, in blueberries, down here at the bottom, we have blueberries treat high blood pressure. Can you say this? We're getting lots of no's. No, 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 no. Okay. You guys are all on the same page here, and you're all correct. No, you cannot say this. You can't be making any statements about curing or treating diseases again, but maybe instead this manufacturer could put a statement on there that says contains 4 grams of fiber per serving or good source of fiber. That would be a nutrient content claim. And they could take it a step further with a health claim if they wanted and say a diet high in fiber and low in saturated fat may help reduce the risk of heart disease. All of that would be fine, but the way that they currently have it on there is not allowed. Okay, and Teddy Grahams. We have our little teddy bear with a little checklist, and it says a good source of calcium, iron, and zinc to help support kids' growth and development. Is this okay? We're getting lots of yeses. Yes, yes, yes. Cool. All on the same page with this one, that yes, this is an allowable claim. It's a combination of a nutrient content claim, so they're saying good source of, what was it, zinc, iron, and calcium, so that means that there's between 10 and 19% of your daily value per serving for all of those nutrients. And they're also making a structure function claim. saying that a diet rich in those certain nutrients is important for the growth and development of the body. So these are all good things and all things that they can back up. Okay, and this is our last one. So we have some Minute Maid juice, and it says, help nourish your brain, 5 nutrients to support brain and body. Is this allowed? Okay, we're getting quite a few yeses, some nos. Yes, no, yes, no. Okay, so this one's pretty mixed, and I would agree with you guys. This one kind of had me stumped. Ultimately, we went with can, assuming that this manufacturer is relaying all of the additional information that they need maybe on the back of the package. So they're making a structure function claim, saying that there are 5 nutrients that are important to maintaining normal brain function. So that would be an unqualified claim because the science is sound there. On the front of the package, it doesn't say what those 5 nutrients are. It mentions omega-3 and DHA. So our belief is that on the back it goes into more detail, which would make it okay. If for whatever reason they don't go into that much detail on the back, then I would say it's not an allowable claim because it's not giving enough information to the consumer. It's not that this juice magically nourishes your brain and your body. It's whatever those 5 nutrients are. So this was a tricky one. I could see it going either way, but hopefully they have all the information that we need on the back. Okay, and now that we've covered nutrition, we're going to chat about ingredients and ingredient labeling really quick. So ingredient statements follow the nutrition label on the back of the information panel on a product. You must list all of the ingredients that are present in a product, including sub-ingredients, and you can separate those with parentheses or brackets. If you have sub-ingredients, then you can use brackets. It's listed in the order of prevalence in the food, so you can't do it alphabetically, you can't do it in the order that it was added to the product. It must be in order by weight that it's present in the final product. And then when it comes to naming ingredients, the FDA has an approved list of names that you can use. So you can't say, gosh, I can't even think of an example. This wouldn't be the case, but maybe instead of saying skim milk, the FDA says you must say non-fat milk. The FDA has all that spelled out in the Federal Register for ingredient labeling. And it's also important to not mislead consumers. A lot of manufacturers get in trouble over this evaporated cane juice. It makes it sound a little bit more elegant than what it really is, which is sugar. So the FDA has recommended that instead of using terms like that, you just go with a simple one that consumers will understand. And for restaurants and similar retail food establishments, you'll want to check the food code that's being enforced where you have locations. That's really what's determining what may or may not need full ingredient statements in your establishments. Some places, if you have like a grab-and-go donut case, they're going to require full ingredient statements and allergens even without a nutrition label. So just be careful, make sure that you're checking all the boxes and following all of the necessary requirements with ingredient statements. Okay, and next thing that we'd see on the information panel directly below the ingredient list would be allergens. The FDA identifies 8 foods as accounting for 90% of all food allergic reactions, and those 8 foods must be called out on a food label. They can either be done with a separate contain statement that follows the ingredient list, or they can be called out in plain language in the ingredient list itself. And as of right now, there's no restaurant labeling required for allergens. Europe does have this in place with restaurants, but America hasn't caught up quite yet. However, food allergy training is really blowing up. There are currently requirements in the state of Michigan, Montgomery County, Maryland, and then pending legislation in Illinois, which we highly anticipate will go through soon. But this legislation is requiring any establishments that serve food to have someone on the premises at all times who's gone through approved allergy training. And if you have any questions about those specific regulations, feel free to email us and we'd be happy to direct you to those proper resources. Okay, and gluten-free labeling, this is another term that's now regulated by the FDA. They set an official definition in 2013 after feeling some pressure from the celiac disease community. Before this definition was set, it was really kind of a free-for-all for gluten-free labeling. One manufacturer might have had a totally different standard than another one, so it was hard for them to trust the foods that they were getting and knowing if they were truly gluten-free or not. So in 2013, the FDA has stated that gluten-free means that a food contains less than 20 parts per million. And while this mainly pertains to packaged goods, the FDA has stated that food service should follow the same standard. So obviously on your packaged products, you'll want to make sure that you know where all of your products are coming from. You eliminate the risk of cross-contact with any gluten-containing ingredients. But then if you're serving a gluten-free menu inside your restaurant, you'll want to take it the next step further since there's so much more going on. Retail food is kind of packaged in this vacuum that can be highly controlled, and food service is quite a bit different. One of the most important things you can do is include a disclaimer on your gluten-free menu that informs the guests of your preparation practices, if there is the risk of cross-contact, so if you have shared fryers or shared grilled surfaces, or if you have separate surfaces for preparing gluten-free food, which you absolutely should, that's something to mention in there as well. You just want to give the consumer enough information that they can make a decision based on their own health needs and make sure that they're comfortable eating at your establishment. Also with gluten-free menus, you want to make sure that you verify all of your ingredients. Obviously, you can't have a gluten-free menu item if you aren't starting with gluten-free ingredients, so you'll want to make sure that every single product that you're using complies with that less than 20 parts per million definition. That'll help keep you safe. And if you have any sort of certification or verification, that's a great thing to communicate to your guests and make them feel that much more confident in what they're being served. Okay, and new to the labeling world are GMOs. So in 2016, there was a national GMO labeling law that was signed by President Obama that would require all packaged goods to contain a statement of whether or not they're produced with bioengineering. It's believed that you can either use plain language, so partially produced with genetic engineering, fully produced with genetic engineering. They may also come out with some sort of symbol that means that it's produced with genetic engineering, or even a QR code so consumers can scan the code with their smartphones and be taken to a third-party site that gives them more information about ingredient sourcing. The USDA has been tasked with coming up with the initial regulations and what enforcement will look like, what the actual symbol QR code system will look like, and they're supposed to release their first round of information and guidance to the industry this fall. And from what we've heard, they still are on track to do that. And once that comes out to the industry, then they'll be given a couple years to prepare and release their full labels. So we're thinking that 2020 is going to be the compliance date, but we aren't totally sure yet. It totally depends on when the USDA can get things nailed down and what the administration does regarding this law. Okay, and the last big claim that's being made on food packaging is organic, and this is a claim, while it's kind of held in the same light as natural, they're totally different when it comes to regulation. Organic is really highly controlled by this National Organic Program, which is run by the USDA. Organic food cannot be raised with synthetic fertilizers, conventional pesticides, sewage sludge, ionizing irradiation, or bioengineering. So once the food has gone through this pretty intensive vetting process, then they get to use this USDA organic seal, which is the only federally approved organic seal out there. There are standards for produce, obviously meat, poultry, eggs, dairy, but just a word of caution that organic seafood is not currently being regulated by the USDA. So if you are having products coming in your door, seafood products coming in your door that are labeled organic, chances are that label's coming from their country of origin if they're imported products. And another note on organic seafood is that in order to control what it's eating and how it's being raised, it's going to be a farm-raised product opposed to a wild-caught. So just pros and cons to weigh as you look at those certain labels. Okay, so putting it all together, the number one takeaway is probably going to be that retail labeling can be tricky. I would say it's more difficult than menu labeling, certainly just with how many kind of the age of the information that's being provided. So again, the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act was passed in 1990, so we've had this current label for 27 years. A lot of the definitions that have been set are 20 plus years old, so that can be frustrating. And then it just takes a lot to be fully compliant, making sure that everything's the right size, that it's being worded correctly. So just taking your time with the information that you have and not rushing through labeling is extremely important. If you're a restaurateur or a similar retail food establishment and you're making any kind of health claims, whether those are the qualified, unqualified, or structure function claims or nutrient content claims, you have to have full nutrition information available. If the FDA does come in, they'll want to see that information. Be sure to be careful with undefined terms like natural or clean. Those are ones where, since there isn't a set definition and the FDA doesn't have full guidance, it can be easy to use them in a way that a consumer might find misleading, and you'll certainly hear from it. And then finally, transparency is key. When you're determining whether or not you should make a claim, this is the first thing that should run through your mind. Are you being transparent to the consumer? Is this in the best interest of whoever's going to be purchasing the product, or maybe is it a claim that's a little bit fuzzy and shouldn't be made? And with that, I'll hand it back over to Lori.
Okay, we have been writing down your questions, and we'll get to those in just a couple minutes. But before we do, we wanted to share our next webinar topic with you. Coming your way September 26th is a very important webinar entitled Gluten-Free Guidance for Food Service. The number of gluten-free consumers and allergen-related food product recalls are on the rise. How can the food service industry equip themselves with the right knowledge and practices to keep pace? This webinar will provide an overview of the gluten-free consumer, current regulations and marketing surrounding gluten-free products, and special considerations for establishments when processing and sourcing gluten-free products and ingredients. In addition, we will provide tips on how to inspire customer satisfaction through sound marketing and credible certifications. And like all of our 2017 educational webinars, this webinar will be approved for one continuing education unit that's at level 2 through the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. There will be a registration link in the post-meeting email you received today, so you can be sure to register for this next exciting event. And finally, just to recap before we get into questions, here are some suggestions we have after today's call is over. The first is to fill out the survey that will be hitting your email once we sign off. We do take your comments and criticisms to heart and want to know what we have done well and what we should do better, so please hit us with your honest feedback. For those of you on the call who are interested in receiving those continuing education credits from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, this post-meeting email will also contain a completed proof of attendance that you can download and fill out and easily submit to the Academy to redeem those hours. And lastly, to stay up with current news, legislation, and more, sign up for our newsletter at menutrinfo.com. With all the potential changes coming to the food industry this year, this will be a great resource for you and your brand. And at this time, we'd like to go ahead and answer some of the questions we've been receiving during the call today. So the first question says, will GMOs be required to be labeled on restaurant food?
That's a great question. So as far as we know, the GMO labeling law, while the final guidance hasn't yet been released, we believe it's just for retail packaged foods, and restaurant and similar food, hot prepared food won't be required to be labeled.
Great. The next question says, can you elaborate a bit more on saying gluten-free versus no gluten added?
Sure. So the FDA, just like with some of their other terms, they handle synonyms similarly. So if you say free from or no, the FDA views those in the same light. And I think that in this situation, people saying no gluten added are trying to skirt around the actual definition. I would say that those should be held to the same standard. If you're mentioning absence of gluten in any of your products, you should be following that same 20 parts per million definition to make sure that consumers can trust the information and aren't being misled.
Great. The next question is, when will the new label be required?
That's a great question and something that we didn't really cover in this webinar. So the new nutrition label was released in May of 2016, I believe, and it had a bunch of changes. There were changes to serving size, changes to daily values. There were some new nutrients that were required in addition to added sugars needing to be declared. And this past July, the FDA announced that there was going to be a delay in compliance. Originally, it was going to be July of 2018 that the new label would be required by the industry, but it's been postponed indefinitely. The thought is that it's going to line up with whatever that deadline is for GMO labeling, so that way manufacturers only have to do this one big label update with the new graphics for their label and the new GMO requirements, but we aren't totally sure. So that was a really long way of saying we don't know what the deadline is quite yet, but we're thinking it'll be several years, probably looking to 2020 or beyond.
Great. Okay, the next one says, I thought the USDA was in charge of food labeling. Is that not the case? So the FDA and the USDA are the two big agencies when it comes to regulating food and food labels, and they kind of have this interesting relationship with who controls what. So in general, the FDA is the one that handles all of the packaged foods, while the USDA looks at more commodity items like domestic meat and poultry. So the FDA, they look at about 80% of the food supply, just based on what's out there and what's circulating. There are some weird areas where they kind of have this goofy overlap. So the FDA, just trivia, release it at your next party. The FDA is the one that regulates exotic meat, so like wild boar, but the USDA looks at domestic meat, so chicken, beef, that type of thing. And another one that's interesting is the USDA regulates sausage, but the FDA is the one that regulates sausage casing. So it's kind of hit and miss who takes what, who pushes what off to someone else. But in general, FDA handles packaged foods ready to eat, while USDA takes those commodity goods. Next question is, how do you address broad brand claims for multiple products when they may be correct for some but not all items?
Okay. The individual who wrote this question, maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing an example. So my thought, maybe this is like,
she said
cracker. Oh,
multiple items in a varying menu, fresh ingredients, or when only some are fresh.
okay, so maybe this is doing with supply chain. So some places get fresh spinach, some places get frozen spinach, and they have different nutrients. Okay, so fish are frozen, some are processed, and then looking to make broad claims against a whole product line. Okay, that's making more sense. So this would be like a restaurant. Maybe at one location they get enriched white rice, at another location they just get plain unenriched rice. So they want to make a good source of iron claim because the enriched has iron added to it and it's a good source. I would say you'll always want to err on the side of caution and list the worst case scenario, which in this case would be the unenriched rice because it's lower in those beneficial nutrients. So if there's any chance of a consumer not getting that promised amount of nutrient in their food, I would avoid making any sort of claims. Let me know if that didn't answer your question to the person who asked it, or feel free to reach out to us directly afterwards.
Next question says, with only about 13 meat packing companies in the U.S., will they be required to use the GMO label?
That is a really good question. The USDA, as they're coming up with these labeling criteria, they've asked for some pretty specific input from the industry, such as meat, poultry, fish, shellfish. If it's been raised with GMO feed, does that make it a genetically modified ingredient? So by definition, no, but how valuable is that label if it's not going to that level of depth with the supply chain? So I don't have an answer for your question. I think it'll kind of depend on what we hear from the USDA in the next couple of months. If meat and poultry and dairy, eggs, all those kind of ingredients are exempt from labeling, then no, they won't have to. But if the USDA determines that feed plays an important role in knowing whether or not a product should be labeled, then I would say that yes, those manufacturers, those meat packing plants would need to address that label.
Could you also clarify when menu labeling is going into effect?
Sure. So menu labeling, it was supposed to come to fruition May 5th, 2017, and on May 4th, the FDA announced a 1-year delay, and they opened up a comment period which closed August 2nd, I believe. And actually this past Friday, we got first word from the FDA commissioner that they aren't intending on making major changes to the regulations. They don't want to open it back up to be rewritten. Instead, they're going to be releasing additional guidance to the industry by the end of this year, and we'll be going forward with a May 7th, 2018 deadline. And another important update that was made with menu labeling on Friday, New York City, after that federal delay, they had announced that they were going to go forward with menu labeling enforcement, but in light of what Dr. Gottlieb said from the FDA, it was determined that New York City would have to hold off and wait until the federal deadline in May of 2018. So everyone's on hold. That's covered by that law, but we should be getting somewhere in the next 8 months. We should finally be at compliance.
Great. A couple final questions here. So Claire talked a lot about being cautious with the word healthy. What about making a claim that says part of a healthy lifestyle?
Oh, that's a good one. That's one where I would recommend going to the FDA's website and seeing if they have that listed as an unqualified health claim. It's possible that there are some claims about like high fiber diets or low saturated fat diets, but I'm not sure about that one, what the definition would be. So before using that, I would recommend checking with the FDA, seeing if they have anything on file about when you can and can't use that and what the parameters would be.
Great. All right, one final question here. This person is asking, in a school setting, is it allowed for us to pass along the product's claims? She said, for example, a line of Doritos made for schools is now labeled as gluten-free.
Sure. So I would say as long as the manufacturer has credible claims and you aren't altering the food, then that would be fine. It gets a little bit trickier. So with Doritos being gluten-free and you calling it gluten-free, I don't think that's a problem because Doritos can back that up. Where you will want to tread a little bit more carefully is like if you have mozzarella cheese that's making a good source of calcium claim and you put it on a pizza, it gets a little bit more difficult to make health-related claims when it is a food like pizza that's maybe not so health conscious. So I would just, if you're making any sort of alterations to the food, just double check, make sure that it's being transparent, straightforward to the guest, and there wouldn't be any sort of misleading context. But if it's just the food makes a claim, you sell the food as is, I think that would be fine.
Great. Thank you all for attending today, and thank you for your questions. We hope you enjoyed this call, and we will hope to have you join us next time. Have a great day.